Hi guys, welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how to make a tote bag out of 4 discarded t-shirts. So first we're going to cut our shirts into yarn. If you want a more in-depth tutorial on this, I will link an additional video, but the premise is we cut across at the armpit, we cut off the bottom seam, and then we cut 1-inch strips. And in this case, I actually use my ruler to measure the 1 inch. Then we're just going to extend those cuts almost all the way to the other side. We're going to leave 1 inch of that side seam area still connected. So it's like dangling strips of fringe from that one side. And so once all of our cuts are made, we're going to turn the hem to face us. And here's a little graphic for you to see better. We're cutting at a diagonal, so we make one continuous piece of yarn. And again, if you need to see this in more detail, I will link my yarn making video as well. And then with the remainder of the fabric from the body, the front chest, and the upper back, I'm just going to make 2 rectangles, and I will show you what I do with that. And then I also cut off the sleeves, a straight line at the armpit up to the top of the arm, and I do the exact same thing I did with the body of the shirt, making those 1-inch cuts along one side of the arm and then extending them up to just leave 1 inch still connected at that second seam. And then I cut on my diagonal to make one continuous piece of yarn. And as I wind my yarn ball, I pull it taut so it makes that nice tube shape. And do the exact same thing on the second sleeve. Now with my rectangles from the chest and the upper back, I want to cut this in a way that it's going to zigzag from left to right, right to left to make one continuous piece of yarn. And then I round my corners so I don't have a lot of extra fabric when I pull it tight into yarn. And this isn't going to lay perfectly because it is corners, so don't be discouraged if you have some extra fabric. It'll work out once you start crocheting. I connect it to my existing ball and wind it up and move on to the next rectangle. I do think I might have messed up one cut here, but I ended up just cutting the topmost section strip completely off and just reattaching it manually. Here's how much yarn that produced as well as how much waste. So we're moving on to the second shirt where I'm doing the same process all over again. The bottom of the shirt had little about 2-inch slits on the side, so I cut that off in a straight line first to make my even tube of fabric to cut my strips. And then you'll see after I make yarn out of the body of the shirt, I go back to that bottom strip and I make an extra strip out of that, which I then attach to my yarn ball. Now you'll only see me process 2 long sleeve shirts at this time. I do process one other t-shirt later, but the measurement of 4 t-shirts is going to be for those that do not have long sleeves. And there you see I'm just finishing up those bottom strips that I had left for later and attaching them to my yarn. And there's the finished yarn. So now let's get into actually crocheting. Again, I have another tutorial on finger crocheting in a round pattern, which I will link if you need to see it. But basically, I'm going to make a slip knot, and then I'm going to chain 5, and I'm going to connect the end of my chain to the beginning of my chain. And then I'm going to put 2 stitches in every chain stitch. So I'm expanding outward. And I'm going to continue like this for a few rounds, putting either 1 or 2 stitches into each single crochet that I did previously. So I'm extending outwards. You have to kind of judge it and see whether your working piece is cupping or waving and decide whether you need 1 or 2 stitches. And as you grow outward and get your piece bigger, you're going to have to add fewer stitches. So once my piece is measuring a few inches wide, I'm only going to be putting 2 stitches about every 10th stitch. So now this is starting with the bottom of the bag. So obviously I want it to go just outward, not coming upward at all at this time. And I'm making a shopping bag, so I wanted my bottom circle to be quite large. So I make it about 10 inches in diameter. So you'll see I continue like this for quite a while. So here's a visual of what my circle looks like so far. You'll see I want to expand it outward, which means adding a few stitches every round, and then I want to go upward. So I'm going to continue for a few more rounds, adding stitches each time I go around. That means putting 2 single crochets every few stitches. And all other stitches, I'm only putting 1 single crochet. So now I've run through my first ball of yarn and I'm attaching my second. I'm just using a regular double knot and I'll tuck in those little ends once I reach the end of the piece. So I didn't want to start going upward right when I attach the new yarn, so I'm doing 1 or 2 more rounds building my circle outward. So now I'm making that switch to build upward and I'm changing 2 things. You'll see your single crochets make a little V. I am now only going to add my single crochets into the back line of that V. And what that's doing is that's taking the outside edge of my work and pulling it in. And at the same time, I'm not adding any more stitches to any of my rounds. So I'm not growing any bigger outwards. I'm going straight up. And I think I actually even decreased 1 or 2 stitches on these first few rounds just because I could see that my stitch was close enough that I could skip 1 or 2. And I just continue with just using the outside edge of the V for about 2 rounds. And then I transition back to putting my stitches through that whole previous stitch under both sides of the V. And you'll see it's starting to cup inward, starting to form a little bowl shape, which is exactly what we want. And I just continue this way for most of the rest of the bag, continuing about 12 to 14 inches up, building the sides of my bag. And you'll see I am going to stop at one point to add another t-shirt to make another ball of yarn. But if you've already processed all your 4 t-shirts, you of course don't have to do that. Just keep on crocheting. So here I'm just stretching it out a little bit, seeing how it's going to behave, and it is quite stretchy. And now I've reached the point where I need more yarn. This was my first bag. I didn't know how much I was going to need, so I started with 2 shirts. So here is the third. This is a different material. It's just a t-shirt. The others were thicker long sleeves. So I'm cutting a test strip that's 1.5 inches wide, and I'm going to attach it to my working yarn, and I'm going to crochet a few stitches to see if the width of that yarn is going to match up with what I've done previously. And I actually discovered that was a little bit too wide. It probably would have been fine, but I decided to decrease that yarn width a little bit, and I decided to measure my strips at 1.25 inches instead of 1.5. And the rest of the yarn processing is just exactly the same. So now I attach my new yarn to my working yarn, and I wind up my ball, and I'm ready to go. You can see my bag is almost big enough. So I just continue a few more rounds. I think I did 3 more rounds of building upward before I get to my handles. And now I'm reaching the point where I want to start my handles, and I'm switching to narrating as I go because I needed to say the steps as I was doing it. So apologies for that inconsistency. Take it over me. Hey guys, I'm going to pop in and interrupt myself here because I said if I figured out a better way to make my finger crocheted bag straps that I would update the video for you. And I have played around with it, and I've come up with a way that's a lot less confusing, a lot simpler for you if you want to follow along with this. So what we're gonna do is, once our bag is just about 2 or 3 inches shorter than we want the finished product to be, is where we're going to start working our handles into the round. And this is exactly the same. This is a single crochet pattern all the way up. The only difference is I started with a magic circle, and that's completely up to you. So once I've gotten to the point where I want to start a strap, and I've counted my stitches, at this point I have 36, and so we're going to divide that by 2 since we're having 2 sides of the bag, 2 straps, and so that's 18 and 18. What we're going to do is we're going to chain 8, And then we're going to count 5 stitches away from where we started the strap and keep those open. And then we're going to anchor it there with a slip stitch. And the reason we did this, we put more chains than stitches on our base, is so that this would go up, so it's not just straight across. And then I'm going to single crochet, and that obviously is my first stitch. So then we moved over 5, and this is my first stitch. So that means I have 12 more until my next strap. Good. So including my strap and what I just crocheted, that's 18 stitches. So halfway around. Then I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna chain 8. And go over 5. On the 5th stitch, I'm going to anchor, slip stitch, and then start my single crochet. It should be 13 until I get back around to my first strap. So then once I hit my strap where I've just chained 8, I'm just going to put a single crochet into each of those chains. Continue as normal. Now I'm at my next handle. Make sure this is laying flat. And put a single crochet into each chain. And then continue the rest of the way around. And we're going to go all the way around one more time, putting one single crochet through everything until we tie off. Here's the handles so far. And we're just going to put one more layer so they're just a little thicker. And I'm going to change yarns here so I have one full round of my darker yarn.
Now, once I've gone all the way around with my final row, I'm going to pause when I'm 1 stitch away from the end. I'm going to put a couple inches on my tail end of my yarn and cut it off. And then I'm just going to unhook my loop and pull that through. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my working yarn down, take my finger, skip this next stitch, insert my finger into the stitch after that, pull my yarn through. And then I'm going to skip that stitch again and pull my yarn back into the stitch I started on. And that will close up that gap. And I'm just going to loop through that next stitch to bring it to the inside, and I will tie it off here. And I'm going to weave in the end on the inside. And there we have it.